This is Distant Replay.
Welcome into Distant Replay. I'm Ben George. He's Mike Noto. Tonight, we're sticking with the Untold Netflix series, the docu-series. We've already done the previous two, Malice at the Palace. Then we did the one with Christy Martin. Now, we focus our attention to Caitlyn Jenner, Mike. We're sticking with, hey, if it works, we stick with it, right?
Yeah, and the interesting thing about Caitlyn Jenner is when you click on it to watch it, you have no idea what avenue the documentary is going to take you in, because the life that Bruce and now Caitlyn have led has been so complex.
Yeah, and on top of that, like, we had no expectations. Didn't know where the Christy Martin story was going. And they threw us a pretty big curveball there in that story. So, yeah, I was kind of the same way. Like, we kind of aware of it, but what is the untold part of the story? And we're going to go through that tonight on the podcast. You can find us online, distantreplaypodcast.com, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Please subscribe, hit the like button, leave us a comment, request any games to go back and watch, true crime recommendations, any of that stuff. Put it there on YouTube or connect with us wherever it is you listen. So, Mike, let's just kind of dive into this one. And, again, we just kind of share our thoughts and kind of recap what we saw. I think the biggest thing to me, that was the biggest unknown to me, was the early life. And I think, all of us, especially our age, I mean, we weren't around when Bruce was competing in the Olympics. We were aware of him later on, right? But all we've kind of seen with him has been a lot of the reality TV, then the transition, then Caitlyn. So I didn't know hardly anything at all, but I was really, really surprised and kind of fascinated by his early career, because you'd think an athlete like that would have a superstar kind of path and track, right? But he had none of that.
Yeah, and I think that's what made him such an interesting story back in the 70s when he broke on the scene. And you're right, though. You hit it right on the head. Like, he just showed up in our lives one day as, the stepfather. Bruce showed up as the stepfather to the Kardashians and that whole phenomenon. Mm-hmm. And you knew he won the decathlon. I mean, that was obviously well known. But the path to get from decathlon athlete to marrying Kris Jenner, essentially, like, that whole interim was very, very fuzzy for me, and it filled in a lot of gaps.
It did. And I think what was most nuts is he kind of played a little bit of everything growing up, but went and played football in college. And I'd never once heard about Bruce and football, right? Never once had heard that was something he played, competed in. And you would think there would be some kind of story of, he went to college to play football, but I've never once heard that mentioned. So when they brought that up on this documentary and talked about how he went off to school at Graceland College, of all places, to play football, I was like, wow, I had no clue.
Yeah, and just to fill people in who are probably unaware, because I know I was completely unaware, he went to Graceland College, which is in Ohio, right? And he's from Connecticut.
Iowa. It's in Iowa.
Oh, Iowa. Sorry. Ohio, Iowa. Weirdly enough, those states get confused in my brain. I think because they're kind of sound the same.
Yeah.
But anyway, and he's from Connecticut. I don't know if you knew that.
I don't think I did know that, no.
Okay, yeah, he is from Connecticut. So it's even more random for a kid in the 70s to go to school in Iowa if you're from Connecticut, I would imagine. So, yeah, and it went through the whole story about him going there and him getting introduced into track and field, him becoming a decathlete. And the path for an Olympic athlete back then, unless he was a unique case, was just really wild for me. I don't know if you felt the same way.
I did, and I'll just kind of quickly back up a second, because I thought it was pretty crazy that he had a knee injury is what moved him to track. Like, he when he was competing for football, he got hit. And again, Mike, I still, it blows my mind every time these documentaries. I'm going to say it every time we go through one of these. But I can't believe they have footage of Graceland College football in like the 60s.
The footage in this, look, the one excellent part of this documentary is all of the footage of him from his days as an athlete, whether at Graceland College or in the Olympics or training or whatever, is great. Like, they knocked it out of the park with this footage.
There's actually footage of him getting like helped off the field. I'm assuming this is legit footage of at Graceland, like the knee injury. And he couldn't have played very many games. Like, his career is very short-lived, but there's actually video of him getting helped off. That's, to me, always is crazy to me. And I know it's going to be different now for people growing up. They're like, oh, there's cameras everywhere. Everything you do is recorded. But you go back 20 years into the 90s, and it's not even the case there, but you go back 50 years to the 60s and the 70s, and all of a sudden, like, finding this footage, like you said, of all of his time competing in all different sports. But it was crazy to me. But because he got that injury, he was just lost, and he had a coach come up and say, hey, do you want to try track and field? And he was actually pretty good at it and super competitive. But, yeah, that path to the Olympics, I mean, you think now, these days, you find what you're good at, or your parents help you discover that, and then you're like put in a track that's so super hyper focused on getting there that there's no way around it. But his path was kind of all over the place.
Yeah, and you know what it is you have a coach who, is recruiting his own campus basically, right? The track coach. And I don't blame him for thinking Bruce Jenner would be good at track and field, because one thing I hadn't seen much footage of him from when he was a young man. He's like one of those guys, in high school and college, and you look at him and you say, that guy is athletic. He could probably do anything.
Right.
Like he had that build, you know what I mean? So
yeah, very much.
And I mean, the story they told about him going from, Graceland College to that first Olympic Games in Munich, I thought was very interesting, and it's something I was not totally unaware of.
Yeah, it was. It was fascinating. And, during all this too, I mean, part of this untold part is, I think, how Bruce at that time is dealing with his, internal feelings about himself and trying to identify himself and all that. And that's kind of like the underlying theme. And a lot of what his motivation was just being uncomfortable. And he kind of channeled that energy towards what he was competing in. And it's kind of what drove him to be as good as he was, because, I mean, I don't think I've ever seen, all the greatest athletes we know are always very determined, right? It's like a different level of focus and kind of will to get to where you want to go. So that part didn't surprise me, but he was, among the most determined and focused people I've seen.
Yeah. When you hear Caitlyn in present day talking about how focused Bruce had to be back then, you know what I mean? And you could just see how intense, even to this day, Caitlyn is talking about it,
Yeah.
And it was just, you could just see those Olympic athletes are just built a different way. I kind of equate it to, I watched a special one time on Michael Phelps when he was training for the Olympics. Mm-hmm. And that's a lot how Bruce Jenner did it, where literally his entire life was training. Like, I know it's hard to explain, but like, he lived in an apartment across the street from a track.
Yeah.
He trained for 6 to 8 hours per day, every day of the year. Like it's literally like having a full-time job, never taking a day off, but it being physical, endurance activities, physical activities that you're doing constantly. Like the level of dedication that takes is like absolutely mind-blowing.
It is. And, he got to the Olympics, and I thought it was interesting when he was explaining, or Caitlyn now, I guess, is explaining. And Caitlyn looks at Bruce as kind of a character now, like talking about Bruce, it's like kind of a different person altogether as he's telling these stories. She's telling these stories. And so I apologize for any, mix up here as we're going through this. But as Caitlyn's discussing like this first Olympics and getting in there, competing, and and I just would assume that Bruce was always kind of top of the game. Like we think about, you're a decathlete and you win the decathlon. You're considered the greatest athlete in the world, right? But you look back at those 72 games, and I was kind of surprised. Like he essentially didn't really challenge at all. Finished I think 10th overall, and had a couple good events, but there was a lot of things like the sprints he was not very good in at all, and competed all right. But then what the moment it all clicked was afterwards, going back into the stadium and watching the Soviets atop the podium and getting that medal. And Caitlyn says that's what at that moment decided, hey, I want that in 4 years. Like that is my ultimate goal, is to win that medal. And you said it, like that's why when that happened, it just became training and like a huge obsession with that. And that was the only thing on Caitlyn or Bruce's mind at that point.
And that is like the pursuit of excellence that we love from our athletes, right? You hear it a lot with professional teams. They lose a championship one year, they watch the other team celebrate, and it gives them motivation, to come back the following year. Well, now we're talking about, right? We're talking about Bruce having to harness that and use it as motivation for the next 4 years. He's got 4 years. His guy that he wants to get and he wants to chase down is Mykola Avilov, the Russian that you mentioned before, standing atop the podium. And it was pretty, Caitlyn in present day talking about how much Bruce's focus was on beating Avilov. Yeah. And he was a guy that was talked about a lot in this. And that was Bruce's singular focus. Like I said, training every day, living across the street from the track, training with no coach, by the way.
Yeah, that was
which
crazy
is
to me.
I've
Wow.
and he literally had to like jump over the fence to get access to the track. I think it was at a college in San Jose, California, and his girlfriend at the time, later become his wife, I believe, right?
Yeah.
Is like literally like his trainer. Like she's out there with a stopwatch, guiding him through drills. Like he's doing all this 6 to 8 hours a day with no dedicated coach. And to think about that these days, where every sport is specialized, never mind an Olympic decathlete,
Yeah.
is just, again, just shows you the difference between sports in the 70s and now. But yeah, that athlete in pursuit of that main goal is like why we love sports.
And it shows you how great of an athlete Jenner was. I mean, you have to have really an incredible makeup to be able to pull that off solo. I mean, to not have, and there was a couple of sports that Jenner was really good at and really focused on, but had to really work hard to improve a lot of the running stuff that he was doing at the time. And you watch it, and I loved the fact that he had a dog that would come out with him and like actually run around the track and chase him on the beach.
That's
like
awesome.
do every
Yeah.
single workout with him, which is, I know you're not a dog guy, but
No, I'm a
even
dog.
you can
Let's
appreciate
let's
that.
let's not say that on this podcast. I prefer not to own a dog. If I'm around a dog, I'll pet it. Okay, let's get that straight.
Fair enough.
But Ben, it's very interesting when Caitlyn was talking about the body of a decathlete and how it's like a delicate balance, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to get too beefed up so you're good in the sprints, but then you can't jump, right?
Yep.
But I think that was important for him. If you look at Bruce from the 72 Olympics to the 76 Olympics, I think the biggest thing you see is he's even more chiseled, and the difference between the two is like he's completely jacked. I mean, this dude, you could see, how you see that athlete these days where you're like, he just looks like a lot better shape than everyone else.
Yeah.
Like that's the feeling I got when I was watching these highlights of him from the 76 Olympics in Montreal.
Like legit chiseled. I mean, that expression does get used quite a bit, but I think that's a great way to describe Jenner's body. I mean, it just like perfect. I mean, it was, just strong at every level, right? Legs, arms, upper body. I mean, he had everything and use that to his advantage. But, showing back up to those 76 Olympics with that focus and to pull it off was amazing to really accomplish that. And we got great footage, again, of all these games, some behind-the-scenes stuff. The shots of his parents in the stands, like stuff they're saying in these things was incredible.
Yeah, his parents seemed like his mom, who's still alive, was in this documentary on like a FaceTime call.
Yeah.
I think it's great that she could use FaceTime. She's like 95 years old, I think he said.
Yeah.
And his dad was like the main, his biggest fan, along with his mother, there for the whole ride. The girlfriend who would become his wife was there for the entire thing as well. Just a cool story of an athlete that, is literally doing all this stuff in solitude, and then like a month later is maybe one of the most recognizable athletes in the world.
Yeah. Yeah, his dad, dude, looks so salt of the earth, right?
Dude, it is unbelievable. He just looks like he got done like as a plumber and then went to the Olympics. You know what I mean?
Looked like he'd spent a lot of time working outdoors. He had that like leather tobacco skin and probably burned a number of heaters in his time. Like that guy looked like, I mean, I never would expect his dad to look, like Jenner's dad looked like that.
He seemed like he was a tough guy, and Bruce Jenner was that's one thing you learn is how focused and tough and like gritty Bruce Jenner had to be to get to where he got to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, pretty incredible. So winning the gold in 76, huge accomplishment. And I thought to show how like incredible athlete he was, when they really made a point to point out like when these decathletes are done, they just like collapse, right? I mean, after everything they've been through and everything they laid out there,
great.
And he just runs around the track like kind of like a cool down mode. Like a guy that just got done taking a couple laps to the local track and ran 3 miles. And let me take a lap and just cool down. It seemed like it didn't faze him.
It was like all of the other people that participated were like in his wake, like on the ground.
Yeah.
It was almost like they got impacted by like some kind of like disease that caused him to collapse, and he didn't get it or something.
Right.
Like, but that goes to show you're right. Like that's a great thing to bring up, because that was something that stood out in this. They're literally all collapsed on the ground. He's running around.
Yeah, it looked like he'd been like barely even competed. And then Jenner sets the world record in the process, which is just incredible. I mean, it really is. Everything aside, when you just look at the 6 years, when he goes from football. I don't know how long he ran before competing in the Olympics. It wasn't that long, right? But that time period between the time he left football and to get where he was in '76, I mean, it's one of the great American athletic accomplishments, I think.
Certainly, yeah. From an Olympic standpoint, I mean, you could other than these guys who win, who they just have sports that lend themselves to them lasting longer, right? I mean, individual accomplishment. How does it get better than this?
Yeah, that's
10 events over 2 days, and you set a world record.
Right. Yeah, pretty amazing. So from there, I mean, Jenner's post-Olympic life would end up marrying Linda Thompson. He's been married 3 times. Christy, the lady he met at Graceland, then Linda Thompson, then, of course, Kris Kardashian, who they were married for 24 years, rather. And that was a big thing. I mean, we get a little bit of the behind the scenes on how all this unfolded and all the struggles that Jenner was dealing with, trying to kind of figure out again, who she was at the time, and just having these children, and very committed to the family and really raising the girls right and everything. It was great to hear the perspective of Jenner on all this, Mike, and kind of getting a better sense of everything that she's been through to try to figure this thing out and to get where she is. And it was tough. I mean, some of the footage of TMZ and stuff it's kind of tough to watch now, right? Hearing other things being shouted at him, and just like the harassment that happens, and like the breaking news of him getting his Adam's apple taken out at the time. Like,
I didn't really follow, admittedly, like I don't really follow like pop culture that much.
Yeah.
Like, so I didn't really know how that all went down.
I didn't either.
And I didn't really know anything about his son that he had. What was the lady's name that he was with when he was in college and when he was a decathlete?
Christy.
Yeah, I didn't know that they had a son, Bert. Totally unknown to me.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we know about Linda Thompson. That's Brody Jenner's mother. Okay, I think we all know who Brody Jenner is, and obviously the kids that he had with Kris Kardashian, Kris Jenner, or whatever, the step kids in Khloe, Kim, and Courtney, and then his daughters with Kylie and Kendall. So Bert was the one from the first marriage was someone I was not familiar with. So it was unique, and it seems like in a lot of ways that may be the child he's closest with, from what I got, because it seemed like he kind of knew or had a good idea of what was going on beneath the surface with Caitlyn, and that maybe no one else did. Yeah,
definitely. And it was I didn't know. I still don't know anything about it. I just looked him up a little bit, but apparently he's a big off-road. He's a professional off-road racing driver and owner of the West LA Dogs, which
there you go.
I think it's a racing team. So
he looks about the most opposite of Brody Jenner,
yeah,
and Kylie Jenner,
yeah,
that you could possibly,
yeah,
it's actually funny from that perspective. But like, that's Kylie Jenner's stepbrother.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
He probably like reading his background, like being this professional race car driver, or he looked more like Caitlyn's dad, right? Like that kind of style. But I think he's probably got like a little more LA in him than he let on in this documentary. That's just my takeaway. But I was surprised by that too. But I mean, all in all, I mean, I don't know. That's kind of all I have on the doc, Mike. I don't know if there's anything else that you jotted down that you thought was worth noting before we get out of here.
No, I just think it's one of those documentaries where I hope people, when they saw the title to this, gave it a chance to see what this documentary is actually about, because I don't think many people are that familiar with Bruce Jenner's story as an Olympian, what it took to get him there, and then how, Caitlyn talks about what, Bruce was going through mentally during that time. Like, I don't think there's been many pieces that have articulated that. So definitely worth a watch.
Agreed. All these Untolds have been very good. Out of the 3, how you ranking these 3 so far? Not to put you on the spot, but I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah. I thought they were all good and worth watching. Okay. I knew a lot about the Malice at the Palace beforehand. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I would probably go the Christy Martin 1, Jenner 2, and then the Malice 3.
Okay.
I just knew a lot about the Malice beforehand, though. So
yeah, that's probably fair. But I think the Malice did give you some really good Untold perspective of it with the player side.
It did.
So.
Oh, check out all of them, and
Right.
like and subscribe and do all that good stuff, please.
Yeah, please let us know what you thought about it as well. We'd appreciate that. Leave a comment. As Mike said, like and subscribe. And please, whatever podcasting app you listen on, please subscribe there as well. Follow us, whatever the terminology on whatever app you're on, Apple, Google, Spotify. We're all on all of them, so we appreciate you listening. But we'll have more documentary recaps upcoming, plus games and true crime still to come on the podcast. Mike, enjoyed it.
Absolutely. Until next time.